The recording is there. It is. How'd I do, John? Okay.
Good. Except we're not live. We're Memorex.
It's amazing. You can't even tell the difference.
Yeah.
So that's it. Good. So everybody doing all right? I hope.
So far, so good.
So how's the teddy bear doing?
Yes.
All right. Good. So
It's good. Me not so much.
no, I hope then you'll be feeling better very soon.
No, I'm okay. It's my husband.
I hope he'll be feeling better very soon. Today what we're going to be doing is my plan is to share a story from Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, whose name originally was what was his name? Rabinovich. What was his first name? I forgot. See, when you take it for granted that you're going to remember what it is. So, anybody remember what Shalom Aleichem name was? No. Okay, here we go. John, you're going to pull it up for us right away. Maybe.
I'm looking.
Yeah. His name was Shlomo Rabinovich. That's what his name was. So he was born in 1859. He died 1916 of tuberculosis in New York, and he was one of the great giants of modern Jewish literature, and specifically mostly writing in Yiddish, and a pioneer in that. He started making his name in the end of the 19th century, and he became world-renowned, very beloved writer. Fiddler on the Roof is based on his stories of his creation, Tevye the Milchiger, Tevye the Milkman. So stories that he wrote about Tevye became the basis for Fiddler on the Roof. And he was called, in his own lifetime, he was called the Jewish Mark Twain, because he was considered to be such an ingratiating writer and such a popular writer. And the story is that Mark Twain, when he heard about it, he said, well, go tell him, I consider myself the American Shalom Aleichem. So it was like with a little mutual admiration expression. So Shalom Aleichem is a wonderful, popular writer. His granddaughter, anybody remember who his granddaughter was? So his granddaughter was Belle Kaufman, up the down staircase. That was his granddaughter. He wrote all kinds of stories and novels, and he wrote an autobiography. And he was considered in his lifetime to be a kind of an entertaining writer. Later on, people started discerning darker, more serious strains in his writing. And we'll see whether that's the case in the story that I want to share with you today. The story is called Greens for Shavuos. It's translated by Lisa Chevrin, Shevrin, from a book called The Treasury of Shalom Aleichem Children's Stories. And that's another good question. Is this just a children's story? A story for children? Is it a story that everybody can take something out of?
What's it called again?
The name of the book is called The Treasury of Shalom Aleichem Children's Stories. The story itself is called Greens for Shavuos. And it's spelled here Shevus, the Yiddish pronunciation of Shavuot. We're looking forward next week to celebrate. Is that true? I don't know. I don't know. Could be. Oh, look at that! You met it there. Very good. So, so another career besides being a translator of Yiddish stories, for the translator. Next week we celebrate the holiday of Shavuos, and that'll be on Thursday night, Friday, Shabbat. It's the holiday traditionally celebrating the giving of the Torah and the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. We count day by day by day to get to that Mount Sinai destination after we leave Egypt. We count, counting the Omer is what it's called, and today is the 41st day of the Omer. So we're getting there, and next week the holiday begins. One of the beautiful aspects of celebrating Shavuot. Shavuot is the least elaborately celebrated holiday of the three pilgrimage holidays. We have Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So Passover and Sukkot are 7-day holidays in the Bible, 8 days outside of the land of Israel. They've got very special qualities of that mark them off as special times. Passover has the matzah, and we have a seder. That's very, very important. Get rid of all the chametz in the house. So there's a real transformation for 7 days to celebrate that holiday. Sukkot, of course, has the sukkah itself, has the lulav and the etrog. So it's got very distinctive celebrations that mark the entire week and change the whole ambience in a Jewish home during that holiday. Shavuot is different. Shavuot in the Bible is 1 day. It's 2 days outside the land of Israel, but it's only 1 day, and it's seen actually as a kind of a culmination of Passover. So the way Shmini Atzeret is an extra 1-day culmination of Sukkot. And Shavuot has, for our purposes, in biblical times, it had special significance of bringing the first fruits, bringing the shtei halechem, 2 loaves of bread baked with the new wheat harvest that was to be celebrated. But for our Jewish life, there's nothing special about Shavuot. There is no ritual object that we have to take. There is no special observance, no special ceremony per se that we're mandated to engage in. So instead, the Jewish people created over time various customs to make Shavuot special. So one famous custom is to eat dairy. Right, this is a very distinctive idea because in general, in the old-fashioned way of thinking about making a meal special, a meal without meat wasn't considered special. So on Shabbat, if you could afford meat, you had meat. If you could have chicken, you had chicken. So eating a meat meal was considered luxury. It was considered a special way of marking an occasion, and the idea that you should turn a holiday into a dairy meal really makes it unique. So that Shavuos is a milchigs holiday with cheesecake and blintzes is a very interesting phenomenon. And of course, it's a completely unmandated thing. It's a custom. Another custom that we have is to study all night. Study all night on the first night of Shavuot, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. We'll be having a Tikkun in our own kind of special way, given circumstances now this year. All over the place, there's a lot of work that's being done on it. You'll get Shomrei week. You'll have links for our Montclair Community Tikkun. You'll have a link for a nationwide Tikkun that's being sponsored by the conservative movement. So that's now actually more and more popular over the last generation. The Tikkun became something that wasn't just observed by a small cadre of devotees, but it's become more and more popular. The Tikkun itself is a few hundred years old. The widespread practice of the recognized mention of celebrating Shavuot with a Tikkun goes back maybe 500 years. So it's another custom that has enhanced the holiday. There's one more custom, and all of this is all by way of introduction for this story. And this is where we're finally going to get to the story. Hold on to your seats. And that is to decorate the synagogue with greenery, with flowers, with branches of bushes and trees. So this, in the old days, and still in many synagogues, is a custom that, again, is really an enhancement of the holiday. It's bringing nature into the building itself. What we do at Shomrei year in and year out is that we have taken another custom, the custom of the chuppah, to have the Torah reading under a chuppah to celebrate the marriage of the Israel with the Torah with us and God. So we have the marriage imagery, which is another custom. And we decorated every year we decorated the chuppah with pictures of flowers and paper flowers. We didn't actually go out and cut down branches and put them in or bring in flowers, but that's possible also. So, and that comes from the idea of the Mount Sinai being this mountain in nature, and we think of Mount Sinai when we think of the Sinai Peninsula now, and we think of what usually is identified as Mount Sinai as being a pretty barren place. But according to the way the Torah speaks about it, it was apparently a good pasture area for the animals. And God says, don't let the animals come up on the mountain until after I finish giving the Torah. And then once I finish giving the Torah, then the animals can come up and they can enjoy themselves. And there are midrashim about how nature was singing and flourishing because of the giving of the Torah. So bringing nature into the picture is also a beautiful custom. And that's where we get to the title of our story, Greens for Shavuos. One day, for Shavuos, I begged my mother, may she rest in peace, to let me go by myself beyond the edge of the town to gather greens for the festival. And she did. May God grant her eternal paradise for that. The best journey is one made without companions, without obligations. Free as a bird, I'm the only one in the whole vast universe. Above me lifts the pure blue canopy we call the sky. For my sake alone beams the radiant queen of day we call the sun. And for my sake alone are assembled here in the open fields all sorts of creatures, those that sing and those that twitter and those that leap. Only for my sake does the fragrant rose bloom, does the golden sunflower spread out its petals, does a gentle nature spangle the countryside with her fresh delights. No one pesters me, no one keeps an eye on me except God. I can do whatever I please. Do I want to sing? Then I sing me a song. Do I want to shout at the top of my lungs? Then I scream like a banshee. Do I want to make a shofar out of my fist? Then I trumpet with a long, rousing sound on my shofar. Do I want to suddenly throw myself down on the green grass? Then I roll on all sides in the grass, cavorting and frisking like a colt. Who is there to stop me? Whom do I have to mind? I'm free. I am free. The day was so balmy, the sun so glorious, the sky so clear, the fields so green, the grass so fresh, my mood so lighthearted, my soul so overflowing, that I forgot I was only a visitor who had come to gather greens for Shavuos. I find myself imagining I was a mighty ruler, a prince who was master over all he beheld, as far as his eye could see, over the fields and all the things that grew in the fields, and over the blue sky above as well. All belonged to me. I was their sole monarch, and I made all the laws, no one else. And like a lord, I was determined to show my power and authority. I could and would do as I pleased. First off, that tall giant with his yellow hat, the sunflower, displeased me. Suddenly, it was transformed before my eyes into the shape of an enemy, Goliath, the Philistine. And all the other plants, with and without stalks, the string beans and the lima beans, they too became enemies who had taken possession of my land. Who had invited them? And those short ones, the cabbages, what were those round heads doing here? They might get drunk and cause trouble. To the devil with them, who needs them? Angry thoughts and fierce passions were stirring in me. A strange longing for revenge took hold of my being, and I began to avenge myself on my enemies. And what a vengeance it was! I had brought with me tools to cut the greens for Shavuos, a pocket knife with 2 blades, and a sword that was sharp, though it was made of wood. It was the very sword I had carried during the holiday of Lag BaOmer, when my friends and I fought pitched battles. Even though I had brandished it in battle at the edge of town, you can be sure that it had not shed a drop of blood. My sword was the kind of weapon, My sword was the kind of weapon the army issued in peacetime only. Actually, there wasn't a hint of war anywhere. It was calm and peaceful all over. But in order to maintain the peace, swords, guns, rifles, cannons, horses, and soldiers had to be kept in readiness just in case. As my great aunt Ethel used to say while putting up raspberries, may we never need them. It's a well-known fact that during a battle, one attempts to bring down the field commander first. The general himself is better still. Then the rank and file fall like so many dominoes. Shouldn't surprise you to hear that I attacked Goliath the Philistine first, giving him a sound thwack on his yellow hat with my sword, along with a few slashes on the side for good measure. The villain was soon laid out full length at my feet. After him, I knocked down many other foes, as I ripped the lances out of their hands and flung them to the winds. Those low-lying stubby ones with the green heads were slain by other means. I tore off the green heads of those within my reach, and the rest I trampled into the earth, crushing them to dust. In the heat of battle, when the blood comes to a raging boil, a person can go berserk, annihilating everything in his path. When it comes to spilling blood, a person can take leave of his senses. He doesn't respect age or take pity on women and children. Blood gushes like water. My rage and my zeal increased after I delivered the initial blows to the enemy. The more I raged, the more I urged myself on. And so vehemently did I enter into the work, so ecstatically, so violently, that any and all things in my way were soon destroyed. The young plants suffered the most at my hands. The little round watermelons, the squashes with their fat bellies, the tiny cucumbers still attached to their yellow flowers. They especially provoked me with their meek passivity, and I gave them something to remember me by. I smashed heads, split bodies in two, chopped limbs to bits, beat, maimed, and slaughtered. I cannot begin to fathom the source of the fury that swept over me. Poor innocent potatoes lying deep in the ground, I tore from the earth as a warning that from me there was no hiding place. Young garlic plants and green onions, I tore out by the roots. Radishes went flying in all directions. May God punish me if I tasted so much as one radish, because I remembered distinctly the words from Scripture, "Thou shalt not plunder." Jews did not plunder. All the while, my evil impulse was urging me to taste an onion or enjoy a bit of garlic, but I could hear the prohibition from Scriptures sounding in my ear, even as it is chanted, complete with the proper intonation, "Thou shalt not plunder." Meanwhile, I could not stop myself from battering, chopping, shredding, mutilating, and throttling young and old, big and small, rich and poor. Utterly without mercy, I was untouched by their shrieking, their weeping, and their pleading. I was absolutely heartless. Unbelievable. I, who couldn't bear the sight of a chicken being slaughtered, a cat being thrashed, a dog being humiliated, a horse being whipped. How had I become such a brute, such a tyrant? Vengeance! I could not stop shouting, as if intoxicated. Vengeance! I will make you pay for all the Jewish blood spilt. I will make you pay for Jerusalem and for Beitar and for the Jews in Spain and Portugal and Morocco, as well as our own, and for the Torahs that were defiled, and for the, help, save me, my ear, my ear. 2 sharp blows to the back of my head and 2 stinging slaps across my face brought me instantly back to reality. And I saw before me a familiar figure, one I could have sworn was no other than Ochrim, a tenant farmer. As far back as anyone can remember, Ochrim had rented some acreage at the edge of town. There he raised watermelons, pumpkins, cucumbers, potatoes, onions, garlic, radishes, and horseradish, from which he made a decent living. How did I know Ochrim? He did business with us, borrowing money from my mother every year before Passover and paying it back a little at a time after Sukkot. My mother would enter his payments on the inside cover of her thick prayer book, in which she kept all her accounts. There she reserved a space for Ochrim and had written in large letters, Ochrim's account. Each payment was listed in a column. From Ochrim, 1 ruble. From Ochrim, another ruble. From Ochrim, 2 rubles. From Ochrim, half a ruble. From Ochrim, a sack of potatoes, and so on. Although my mother was a poor widow with children who managed to survive on the interest she earned from loans, she never charged Ochrim anything. He would repay us with produce from his garden, sometimes more, sometimes less. We never quibbled with him. If the harvest was good, he would supply us with potatoes and cucumbers for the whole winter. If it wasn't, he would apologize to my mother in Russian. "Don't be angry, madam. The harvest was poor." My mother would forgive him and tell him that perhaps next year he would be able to be more generous. "Trust me, madam. Trust me," Ochrim would say. And he always kept his promise. The first onions and garlic were always at our house before the rich folks. I would overhear our neighbors grumbling that the widow wasn't as badly off as she would like people to believe. "Look at that. She gets the best of everything." Naturally, I immediately relayed this tidbit to my mother, and she cursed them roundly. "May they have salt in their eyes and stones in their hearts. May those who begrudge me what little I have nothing themselves." Naturally, I immediately relayed to our neighbors what my mother had wished them. And naturally, they were furious with her, calling her a name that made my ears burn. Naturally, I resented this and immediately told my mother about it. My mother rewarded me with 2 smacks, told me I'd better stop carrying Purim treats from one to the other. I cried because the smacks hurt, but the words Purim treats kept running through my mind. I couldn't understand why she referred to my tales as Purim treats. It was a joyous occasion for me when I would see Ochrim coming from afar, wearing his thick white woolen jacket that he wore summer and winter. I knew he would be bringing a full sack of potatoes from his garden for us. And I would run into the house to tell my mother the news that Ochrim had come. I must confess that between Ochrim and myself, there was an unspoken affection, a kind of sympathy that can't be expressed in words. We hardly ever spoke to one another because I understood only a few words of his language, and he didn't understand mine at all. I was also shy. Such a big man was this Ochrim. How does one talk to him? I had to call on my mother to be my interpreter. "Mama, ask Ochrim why he didn't bring me any sour cherries." "Where should he get sour cherries? Sour cherries don't grow in a vegetable garden." "But why don't sour cherries grow in a vegetable garden?" "Because there aren't any cherry trees in a vegetable garden." "But why aren't there any cherry trees in a vegetable garden?" Why? You're too curious for your own good," my mother would say, exasperated, giving me a smack. "Adam, don't be harsh with the boy," Ochrim would say, trying to defend me. Ochrim was that kind of peasant. His were the hands that now held me captive. How had it come to this? It was not difficult to figure out. When Ochrim arrived and saw his garden being demolished, he must have been stunned. dumbfounded. He saw some creature devastating his property with a sword. Ochrim probably thought I was an imp or a demon. Most likely he crossed himself several times. But once he came closer and saw that the demon was only a Jewish boy with a wooden sword, grabbed me by the ear with such force that I fell to the ground and began to scream with all my might, "Oh, oh, oh, my ear, let go of my ear." It wasn't till after the sharp blows and the stinging slaps delivered by Ochrim that our eyes met and we recognized one another. We were both stunned, unable to utter a sound. "The widow's boy!" Ochrim cried and crossed himself. He surveyed the damage I had caused him, carefully examining each vegetable bed and each clod of earth, becoming so upset that the tears started in his eyes. He stood facing me, his hands folded across his broad belly, and said just one word, "Zashdecha." Why? That moment, I fully realized what a terrible crime I had committed, and to whom I had brought so much anguish. And I asked myself the same question. Why? Why? "Come," Ochrim commanded, yanking me by the arm as I cowered with fear. Soon he would make mincemeat of me. But Ochrim didn't harm me. He just grasped my arm so tightly that my eyes almost popped as he led me home to my mother to tell her the whole story and to leave me in her hands. Need I tell you what I received from my mother? Need I describe her shock and her fury? How she wrung her hands as Ochrim described the total destruction I had wreaked on his garden. Sparing no detail, he demonstrated to my mother, using his staff, how I had flailed away on every side, smashing and breaking and stamping and trampling, how I had torn the young potatoes from the earth and ruined the little cucumbers. Why did he do it? Why, madam? Ochrim could speak no more. He was too choked with tears. Children, I must tell you the honest truth. Better to have been punished right there and then by Ochrim than by my mother before Shavuos. To top it all, there was the humiliation I had to suffer from my classmates, who tagged me with the nickname Yossel the Gardener. This dandy nickname was to follow me right up to the time of my wedding. And that's how I gathered greens for Shavuos. That's the story. So now if people want to take turns unmuting, and if you want to share any of your thoughts and reactions to this story, what do we make of this story?
What was the
The
author's
author is Shalom
name? I
Aleichem.
missed it. Ah,
Who else? Exactly.
Wonderful
Who else?
story.
Right.
One of the
Wonderful.
things I found interesting is when the neighbors were saying how his mother got the best from the farmer, It's
Yeah.
things are not what they seem to be. And people make assumptions on what they see without knowing what the background, and so things are not what they seem to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the term that the mother uses to describe that gossiping and that backbiting?
Oh, she curses them.
She calls it.
Oh, right.
She says to her son, "What are you bringing shalach manos back and forth?" Right? That's instead of little gift baskets of goodies to exchange one friend to another. He's bringing back these little snide comments that each side is saying about the other. And she's sarcastically called, "Oh, this is shalach manos. Thanks a lot." Right? He can't stop himself. He's going back and forth and getting everybody in trouble with everybody else. Instead of bringing shalach manos, which is supposed to make everybody feel friendly to each other, instead he's creating all of this resentment and angered and at each person in this little small town environment. Yeah. Anybody else?
It reminded me. I mean, it did remind me of Fiddler a little bit in the relationship with the Russian people. You know that he's, you know, they had this nice relationship with a guy who wasn't a Jew, and Fiddler, there's a way that it can go right and a way it can go wrong. You know, the town inspector warns Tevye about the pogrom, and you feel if it's done right, you feel that there's they try to live with each other, and unfortunately, the Tsar prevents that from being possible. But it's like a theme in a lot of his writing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's perhaps the theme is for him is the position of the Jew in the modern world, and in the modern world, the Jew doesn't live isolated and doesn't live only in a one-way relationship with his or her neighbors. There's a more complicated set of forces going on. This is where people have noticed that he's not just a happy-go-lucky writer. Fiddler on the Roof, the last production that everybody saw, that the Yiddish production, it was by the end of the thing you're crying. There's a lot of sense of loss and tragedy, and that's an underlying kind of feeling that is in there, along with the joking and along with the very, very empathetic depictions of all the various characters in his world. It's with a lot of love. He loves his mother. His mother smacks him around like crazy, but there's no question that his mother is his mother, and she deserves every ounce of love from him, and he feels it genuinely.
Rabbi?
Yeah. Somebody wants to
Sometimes.
Who's this?
Sometimes David Canagas. I'm on the phone, so you won't find me on the.
Yeah.
Sometimes people make mistakes, and maybe especially children. So that's what I take away from this.
For sure, this is a in-depth depiction of one terrible mistake and this child knows it. He's telling it in retrospect, and he's this describing his own. He doesn't justify it. He doesn't say hey, why don't people understand me? He knows that he blew it here. He knows that he blew it in a really major way.
As a writer, he's wonderful in getting into the head of a child, because the descriptions of how he whacks these vegetables and fights his enemies. I mean, that's the way a young boy would look at things.
Right. There's a really wonderful. Leah, you want to say something?
Well, I was trying to figure out why the title green. And the green things that he mutilated sounded to me like things that were bitter, like the marigold plant and those other plants. They're not sweet, juicy, fruity type plants.
The watermelon. What about the watermelon?
Oh yeah, that's
And the zucchini, the squash.
Was it watermelon? I didn't remember hearing watermelon. Okay,
Yes, yes.
so,
I was thinking, yeah, go ahead.
so I've lost my train of thought.
So we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it.
I'll come back.
Let me just say that there's a, first of all, a wonderful, if you mute yourself, then I won't hear the echo of myself talking. Leah, mute yourself, please. Thank you. There is a wonderful, really kind of stream of consciousness process that goes, that our narrator gets into, and we really get this whole sense of his being taken over by his own fantasy life and becoming a monster, right? He's a kid, he's a sweet kid. No, he's just a normal kid like everybody else. He gets into his adventures and so on. But then it's really quite to me remarkable how he gets overtaken by this violent feeling, this rage, and it takes a while. First it's just a fairy tale kind of thing. I'm the ruler of this universe, and I got into a war. It's a very young boy kind of thing. It's universal. And he's attacking the enemy and so on. But then, as you go through his continuing description of what he's feeling and what he's doing, it becomes much more specific. It becomes much more rooted in a very specific set of concerns. Does anybody want to chime in on this? What is the real crux of how he actually thinks of his adventure? What does he really think he's doing? I'll give a clue.
You mean winning the war and?
Well, so that's very again, that could be universal. It's very abstract. He keeps talking about vengeance. What is he taking vengeance on? What is he getting his revenge over?
He's probably
all the Jews that were killed, right?
So again, every kid is the same, and yet every kid lives within the culture that they live in. Every culture creates its own sets of imagery and its own fantasies and its own reference points. So here's this little boy. He's, I don't know how old is he? Is he 10 years old? He's been hearing Jewish stories from before he could understand them, and he's imbibing, like with his mother's milk. He's imbibing a sense that goes back to John's original point of what is his place in this big world. And that's where we have this anguish. It's really a really. I'm looking for the word, and I don't. The word. There's a difference between he first. The story starts out. He's going out into nature. He's going out into pure, innocent nature.
And it's a reverie.
And what?
It's a reverie at first.
Yes, but it's a reverie that's triggered by just the magnificence of just the natural world, the sun and the blue sky, and the bushes and the flowers and the vegetables. It's all marvelous to him, and it's pure. And we should also understand that this is one of the things that we find in modern Jewish literature, a rediscovery of nature. Because Jewish history for 1,500 years was based on the uprooting of the Jewish people from their land, literally, not just politically, but literally being uprooted from the land, not being able to own land, not being able to have a sense of home with your own farm, with your own animals, and so on. And modern Hebrew literature, modern Jewish literature, both in the Hebrew and in the Yiddish, made a whole big push for rediscovering nature. And in fact, in Hebrew especially, the writers used to bemoan the fact that there aren't any words for all the flowers. There aren't specific words for the different trees. They had to start making up words because there wasn't a living vocabulary about these things. A tree is a tree. What's the difference between an oak tree and a sycamore tree and a maple tree and whatever other trees? I'm pretty impoverished myself about this, but so this was actually a big agenda in the flourishing, literally, that's a very nature word, of modern Jewish literature in all the language, in certainly in Hebrew and in Yiddish. An urban people discovering the beauties of the earth. So that's how it starts out. But then these very wonderful, delicious, sweet, not just bitter, but it's the whole cornucopia of the bounty of nature is transformed in his imagination into the goyim. Into the goyim who want to kill us, who have been stamping on us and who have been abusing us and murdering us and oppressing us for all these generations upon generations. His whole imaginative world gets transformed by his sense of identity and his sense of history. So there's all of that, military stuff and the thrashing and the smashing and the destroying. First of all, kids like to do that anyway. It gives you a sense of strength and power as you grow up as a little kid. But it's all here filtered through this kind of moral outrage that he feels as a young, vulnerable Jew. And he is, doing God's work to do that. And then we get the other side of the story. Whose vegetables really are these? So they belong to this non-Jewish man, to this goyish apoyer, a peasant. And yet, then we have this whole parallel story of the beautiful interrelationship between that peasant and the narrator's mother. Right? This is not a guy who's out to murder all the Jews. This is not a guy who's out to take advantage of the Jews and oppress them and so on. So Shalom Aleichem has created this very, very tense, contradictory pull between the present experience of this little boy as a neighbor and his developing sense of himself as a Jew. And there's a clash. That's what the story in the end, as I see it, is putting before us. This terrible, terrible contradiction between who this little boy is, what his sense of self is, his sense of history, his sense of consciousness, and yet how tragically that does not fit with his particular experience in his limited life. Right? So, and part of that contradiction is that both of these are right. Both of these realms of reality have validity. Go ahead, John.
What was the destruction at the end? Was it? I can't remember. It sounded like a pogrom or something. What was at the very, very end?
What do you mean destruction of what?
Wasn't there some? I can't remember now. There's something at the end after the punishment from the mother. Am I wrong?
He comes home after the peasant brings him home.
Yeah, and his mother.
After the peasant brings him home, after Ochrim brings him home, and he says, I really wish that I would have been punished by Ochrim. It would have been a lot easier for me to take than the punishment that I got from my mother. Right? So he just alludes to the fact that his mother probably really, beat him to a pulp in a terrible way. And then he says, and what's worse is
you followed him.
Make fun of me.
Yeah, totally.
That's this very Shalom Aleichem kind of element. Like in the end, all of his being physically beaten to a pulp, that's not so bad. What's really so bad is that my friends gave me now a nickname that makes me embarrassed, right? It's a very Jewish, kind of sarcastic kind of point.
Rabbi, do we know what happened to his father? Was he killed in a pogrom?
His father, I think, I'm not sure. It could be. I don't want to say for sure.
Because
I
I'm
don't
thinking
remember.
that could be where some of his anger comes from. Because
Well,
in
it's not.
the story,
Well, you're talking about the kid in the story's father.
Yeah.
Or you're talking about Shalom Aleicham's father.
no, the child in the story. Is there any mention of his father?
I don't know.
No.
It's certainly not in this part of the story. But the story. I mean, these are many stories where the kid narrates many stories.
Ah, okay. And
But
we
it
don't know
doesn't-
about
we don't know.
Shlomo's father.
I don't know, and I don't think that it's actually necessary for the story. I think that the overall Jewish sense that they're all out to kill us
Get us.
is enough. That it doesn't have to be that you had personally suffered, a murder in your family to feel that way.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
there is also a micro story, a personal story. This kid seems to be acting out on the vegetables the way his mother might normally act out on him. So he goes out and becomes king of the realm, and he can rule and beat up vegetables and plants. And then he's discovered, comes home, and he gets beaten up just the way he always was.
Right.
So he was kind of acting out his upbringing.
So the idea of the violence here, yes, definitely has multiple dimensions. The classic idea is, of course, is that the Jew is this meek, passive individual, and of course, Jews had no power, so they weren't agents of official violence. But instead, what we have is a picture of a parent beating up on their kid, which is not specifically Jewish. At that point in time, that was taken for granted anywhere and everywhere. That's the prerogative of the parent in order to raise their child to be a strong and decent human being. So I don't think that was exceptional in portraying his mother that way. And as I said before, I think that there's a lot of love that comes through, because he realizes that his mother is taking her job seriously. She wants to make him into a mensch, and she educates him, and she feeds him, and she has all of this work to do because she's a widow, and she takes care of everyone. She's I don't think an unsympathetic figure. It's not like we have here a story about the parent as a monster abuser or anything like that. But violence definitely has its recognized place in this story in more than one way. We have only a few more minutes to go. Leah, I see your hand. Let me put out a question to people. That's my question. That's exactly my question. So what is gained by what is gained by Shalom Aleichem placing this story within the context of getting ready for Shavuos? What role does the idea of Shavuos?
Sorry that we can't answer the phone right now.
Right.
Is
it
when we can?
Yeah, a minute.
is it is this an allegory for the golden calf? This destruction of a gift, a life-sustaining gift.
I don't know. Anybody else have an idea about this? Anybody want to make some other kind of suggestion? So, I think to my mind, what Shalom Aleichem is doing is bringing up this very question of Jewish particularity and Jewish identity in a very, very sharp way. How do we celebrate Shavuot? in a way that will be in modern times a beautiful celebration of our particular identity without falling into the to put it really, in an extreme way, the swamp of all of the tsaras and all of the wounds that Jewish identity carries with it. I think that's the paradox of the greens on Shavuos. The greens are nature. Shavuos is Jewish particularity. In the sense that we have a Torah, nobody else has this Torah. What do we do with that Torah? How did he know so much? Leah wants to know, how did he know so much? The answer is every yingle, every little child, this is what they got. They didn't watch TV. They didn't have video games. All they heard was Jewish stories. This is all they heard from like I said, from the day that they were born, and from before that. That's all they heard. They heard lullabies from the time they were in the womb that told them about all the stories of Jewish life. I think, to me, that's part of a big part of what this story revolves around. The greens and Shavuos, the open world outside, and the very, very definitive classification of being a Jew on the inside and on the outside, right? How other people see us and how we see ourselves and what we make of ourselves with this Torah. Is it possible to receive the Torah without getting, what can I say, negatively conditioned by so much of what our history is? Thank you. Anybody else have a comment or an insight to share? I don't know what that. Oh, that's Adrian. Say hi to Adrian. So okay, all right. If we're all quiet, then I want to thank everybody for listening in on this story. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes.
And next
Thank
week
you.
we will have another story, and also I think specifically I'm thinking about it in terms of relating it to the upcoming holiday of Shavuot. Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.